Hi, Matthew. Really nice to have you join us. Thank you very much for taking the time. I'd like to start with if you could just explain a little bit about what Touch for Health is.
Well, Touch for Health is a system that's been around since about 45 years now, since 1973. And just in simple terms, I would say it's a system of balancing. And first of all, it's balancing the physical posture. So it's coming out of the chiropractic tradition. George Goodheart is the chiropractor who started using muscle testing to find out what muscles were creating some kind of imbalance in spinal alignment. And in chiropractic, they say, if your spine is in line, you'll feel fine. So that was the first point of a muscle balancing, was to get the spine in alignment. If the spine and the posture in alignment, all the internal organs are going to function better, the nervous system is going to function better, and the natural internal wisdom of the body is going to do its job, and your natural healing system is going to function. But in addition to that part, coming from George Goodheart and applied kinesiology, George Goodheart found not only he could use muscle tests, but different touch reflexes to get the muscles to change. And one of those types of reflexes he used was actual acupuncture points and using the meridian pathway from Chinese medicine. So my father was an early supporter and practitioner, collaborator with George Goodheart, and he found the applied kinesiology was very effective in his chiropractic practice. But then he wanted to develop a system because he found so many of the techniques were simple enough and people were already sort of taking them. When he used them in the clinic, they just sort of learned what he was doing and started rubbing the points for themselves at home. He wanted to develop a system that lay people could use. And so he based it on first that concept, not so much treating specific conditions, but balancing the overall posture. He felt like that's a safe and appropriate and very helpful and effective thing for lay people to do. And he said from Chinese medicine, that's also the model. So if we're integrating some of the Chinese medicine points and techniques, we can adopt the model of balancing your overall qi, balancing the flow of your life energy, that if that's in flow and balance, you'll naturally have vitality, you'll naturally have health, and you'll naturally have a lot of joy and happiness in your life. So he developed the model for Touch for Health to be that balancing model. Balance your muscles and the muscles related specifically to the different energy pathways, and that way we can balance all of the energy pathways, so we balance your life energy. So with those two main focuses, we eventually incorporate also some aspects of nutrition, mental, emotional aspects. So we say that we can do a holistic balancing of the whole person in a Touch for Health balance, rather than trying to diagnose and treat diseases, which at a certain point, yes, you need that when there's some serious life-threatening disease. But for most issues that people encounter day to day, there isn't a diagnosis and there's not really a medical treatment that's appropriate. So we need some tools that the lay people can use on an everyday basis to be maintaining their own health and wellness. So that's the basic concept and some of the features of the Touch for Health system.
Wow, yeah, and that's what I enjoy, is that the holistic person is looked at. And that leads me to some research that I had looked up at while I was looking and searching for information on you. I found a talk that you had where you talked and described the two different health systems, the role of one, the treatment role, where you have a master who takes tests, knows the results, tells the client what's wrong and then what is needed to fix them. And then the assistant role, which was helping clients with self-discovery, learning more about themselves and offering tools for care of yourself. And I truly believe in the healing process, that it's missing something if we don't take that self-responsibility into that process. And that Touch for Health model really takes a lot of interest in this self-responsibility, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely central to Touch for Health. And the reason why we had that model initially in Touch for Health was because we were teaching lay people. So it wasn't going to be appropriate for them to do diagnosis with just a muscle test and trying to treat specific diseases. when they don't have the training in that model. But it turns out, not only does it keep us safe legally and keep us from doing things that just aren't accurate with not enough information just from a muscle test, but it turns out to be one of the most powerful things in the whole system, just the fact that we have the self-responsibility model, where we give the power back to the individual to be the one who have the authority in their own healing and their own pathway towards health and the type of life that they want to envision for themselves. So that's the idea that health is more than the absence of disease. So I can diagnose your disease and cure your disease, and you're not necessarily going to be healthy, meaning you have some satisfaction in life, you feel some purpose in life, you have some joy in life, you feel productive, you feel well. That's not necessarily happening just because I come in and I take your pulse and I give you a drug that changes your pulse, and now I say you're not sick anymore, or at least we're controlling your illness. So that's one of the great powers of Touch for Health, I think, even though originally it was just to keep us safe from going into a role that wasn't appropriate for a person. But it actually comes from a lot of different traditions in healthcare if you go back long in history, but not too far back in history, but some of the roots of Touch for Health. You may have heard of Carl Rogers, who's kind of thought of as the father, what's called client-centered therapy, or nowadays I would call person-centered therapy. And Carl Rogers was working in the psychological field, but what he found was even with physical ailments that some people had, who he was working with in psychological issues, that just focusing on the problem and just trying to treat a problem was problematic. You could treat a problem and have some resolution of that problem, but if you're only focusing on problems, some other problem would crop up and some other problem would crop up, and you're playing whack-a-mole treating problems, and you're never looking at the whole person and looking at what is it they want from life. And he said that actually, if you want people to be healthy, you cannot only study sick people. Sick people don't give you a model of what healthy people want to be and what they need to be. So you need to talk to people about what they want. What is the positive things that they want to have happening in life? And then, of course, take into consideration what seems to be blocking them, what's interfering with that. But with the positive focus, he found oftentimes not only did psychological issues kind of spontaneously resolve themselves just by people having more awareness of themselves, what were their own resources, what choices could they make to improve their lives, but oftentimes actual physical conditions spontaneously resolved when they changed their attitude and their focus in their life.
Yeah, well, we each have a unique body, don't we, and a unique mind. So what works for you might necessarily not be correct or settle or feel good for somebody like me. So when you're looking at the holistic person, you can work on that character, not the generalization of many.
Yeah, and I think many practitioners will say, I don't treat diseases, I treat people. But then when you look at what their routine is, it's mostly focused on symptoms and then how do I treat the symptom. But in the Touch for Health model, because we don't have that expertise to focus on that, we find that actually focusing more on the positive, helping people to visualize what they want from life, and then relieving the stress or even actually the internal, whether they're mental, emotional, or energetic blocks, that frees people up to move in the direction that they want to. Health, but not only health, but more satisfaction in achieving the things that they want to in their life, their lived life.
Yeah. So awareness of what our goals and being able to identify those blocks to achieve these goals is a key concept of Touch for Health, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the workshop that we're going to be giving when I come. We call it Touch for Health Goal Setting and Metaphor. And for a long time, we called the workshop just Touch for Health Chinese 5-element metaphors. But I definitely wanted to emphasize the goal setting as part of that workshop in my design. And in my father, last 10 or 15 years of his life, when he was doing intensive workshops in Malibu and retreats with small groups of people, one of the main things he emphasized was the dialogue part, talking to people about what were their positive goals. Again, of course, listening very carefully to what are their aches and pains, their worries or concerns, what are their problems, how do they feel, getting a full flavor of any problem or pain, but going beyond just that part and looking at, well, when that's resolved, or what is that interfering with the positive thing that you actually want to have manifest in your life. And so over the years, to really emphasize that, I changed the title of the workshop to goal setting and metaphor, just to make sure not only I'm emphasizing that, but all of the instructors that I've trained around the world are emphasizing that aspect of Touch for Health, and especially that aspect of the workshop.
Yeah, great. So it's 20 years, is that right, since you've been in New Zealand last?
Well, I'm not sure if it's 20 years. It might be something more like 14 years. I think I was there around 2004. And actually, that was the first time in Australia and New Zealand that I taught the metaphor workshop and the metaphor instructor training. And so now after 14 years, it's kind of symbolically, that's 14 meridians makes up a cycle in the energy system, although it's in a 24-hour cycle. We've kind of come to a new phase, a new beginning in the cycle as I'm returning to New Zealand. And that's part of my motivation of coming to New Zealand right now. Is my understanding is there is a new beginning going on right now in New Zealand. There's a new energy coming up to revitalize and get the existing instructors active, but also to recruit and train new instructors to make this type of work, Touch for Health and kinesiology in general, more accessible to more people in New Zealand.
And I love being part of that generation. So very exciting. I'm so excited to have you come in March, and really, really looking forward to meeting you in person. And I'm sure many other Touch for Healthers of New Zealand and instructors who come along will appreciate having, the direct source information to share with you. One of the things that I really wanted to ask you, when you grew up with your dad, John Thie, and your mum, Carrie, who were obviously so passionate about bringing these health-enhancing concepts to the public, did you ever get used as your father's practice case?
Well, I don't know if he was practicing on me new ideas or whether he was just following through and using more and more things as he learned. Although you may have heard that his emphasis was always on keeping things very simple. His rule was it needs to be simple and quick and still effective. Not only because he taught all of his techniques to lay people, so for lay people to be able to be effective with it at home, it had to be easy enough, fast, but effective. But in his practice, he had a large volume practice, so he needed to be able to work with people in a short frame of time and still get good results. So he, at home, if I was there and he was there, I almost always received balance and probably a chiropractic adjustment. Sometimes he was off on the weekends teaching applied kinesiology or teaching Touch for Health. But actually, in our family system, I mentioned the communication skills from Carl Rogers, and there was a protege of Carl Rogers by the name of Tom Gordon. And in the 70s, he was teaching workshops called Effective Communication. And both of my parents took that training, but my mother was actually the one who was the instructor of workshops in effective communication. So similar to Touch for Health, we have these powerful fundamental techniques, but are simple and safe enough that we can all use them. You don't have to become a psychologist to learn some of the techniques of listening to your own self-talk or using listening skills. When you're in the listening and supportive role, you can use what's called active listening. So she was already teaching those skills when I was a kid, and my father was just still experimenting a little bit with this muscle testing stuff and integrating it into chiropractic. So in my home, the daily balance was about 80% conversation and just listening to each other and checking in how everybody's feeling and are you okay and do we need to do something? Most of the time, no, I just wanted to be heard and go on about your day. And then maybe 20% was muscle testing and balancing and maybe even spinal adjustment.
Yeah, my 8-year-old daughter, I often, if there's a problem, I'll, take her downstairs to the clinic room and go through things where, you know, she doesn't have the language to tell me some of these things that are going on until I finish a muscle balance. And then all of a sudden there's, you know, emotion, or there's something that she starts to tell me. So we end up having a really lovely conversation about something that she's struggling with. And it's through, you know, Touch for Health, and now the energy systems are balanced. She can make solutions that, you know, an 8-year-old is not in a conscious thinking mind. It's a subconscious mind, and she actually just seems to find some things like courage or brave. And you know, I asked her in 2 days' time after a balance, how are you dealing with that problem? And she was like, oh, nothing's happening, you know, it's all okay. And I'm, yeah, that's my stuff.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So it's I love Touch for Health. I'm really looking forward to sharing you know, days upon days with you in Waiheke in March. So thank you so much for giving me some time today. Have a safe journey, and we will see you in New Zealand soon.
Yeah, well, we're already packing our bags, but if I could add one point, because what you mentioned with your daughter of not necessarily having the vocabulary, the language, in our notes back and forth, we also mentioned something about the idea that the metaphor is the language of emotion. Mm-hmm. And so when I first started teaching about just some of the symbolism of the 5 elements and possible meaning, symbolic meaning, or around the functions of the meridians and the different organs, I didn't really necessarily have that idea as a strong main concept. But after I taught in Zurich, at a school in Zurich, the next time I went back, they had actually added a subtitle to the workshop because they translated from English to German. So they had handled the materials, and their subtitle was Metaphors, the Emotional Language. And I said, I don't know, is it the emotional language? And if so, why? How is it the emotional language? And if it's the emotional language, oops, excuse me. If it's the emotional language, what does that mean for us? What kind of implications does it have for our work? And so as I thought about it myself, coming from a literature background, that's what I studied in university, I know that metaphor, one meaning is symbolic language. Like in poetry, they say poetry is to say much and little. You can use one word to create an image that has a deep impact on people, that they can relate to across cultures in a universal and timeless way. And so part of the power of a metaphor or poetic image is that it's not just a pictorial image, it's a sensory image. You picture it in your mind, but then you feel on all levels, on all 5 senses. You really feel the image, or you feel the idea. And of course, that automatically brings the emotion into it. So any great metaphor, any great poetry is going to have that full sensory, the full body involvement, including the metaphor. So in that sense, metaphor is emotional language. Yeah. So after I thought about that some more, and I thought, well, okay, and then a lot of the things we talk about in Touch for Health, we relate emotion back to perhaps stomach meridian, perhaps that area of the body, we could say stomach. Another word for that area is the enteric brain. So we have all the same kind of neurology, although organized differently in the gut as we have in the brain. In fact, 80% of serotonin is used in the gut rather than in the brain. So you have a lot going on in the gut, but what the gut doesn't have that the brain inside your cranium has is the spoken language. The language of the gut is processing of emotions. So if we're speaking the emotional language through metaphor, we're using spoken language to create these images that's also resonating in the language of the gut. So we're balancing mind and heart, or mind and gut. So that also means mind and body. What you mentioned, the subconscious level, but also the unconscious level. We're actually resonating at the consciousness and awareness of the body that maybe at a waking conscious level, we have no connection, but we, through metaphor, can suddenly have a connection and harmonizing. And so then it's its own way of holistically balancing the person.
Which is why it's so effective with children, because you don't actually have to have a language, you can tell a picture. or tell a story, and that brings up this sort of connection to the emotion.
Yeah, and at first it sounds like, oh, Chinese 5 elements. And there is a lot of mysterious language we can bring in from Chinese medicine. And if you have that knowledge of what does kidney meridian symbolize, you can bring that in. But because we're working with the muscles and the names of the meridians as symbolic, children can work with this very easily because, as you said, they're still working very much on an imaginary or dreamlike way of perceiving reality. So using their imagination as they go through the physical movements and just tuning into their body and picking up intuitively on what are the messages from their own self is very simple, easy, and quick and natural for children. But I find adults can go there too.
Wow, just to see the muscle lock and unlock is very, the person also gets that self-responsibility. Then I'm not just sharing with them, it's actually their body communicating back to me. So I love the fact that this is a facilitator's role, or like you described, the assistant role.
Yeah, in Germany, they have their DGAK, which is their professional association. It just celebrated 25 years, and they've always preserved 2 tracks in the professional association, the medical kinesiology track and what they call the accompanying kinesiology track. So for people with a medical background who are going to use kinesiology in that model, kinesiology can also be quite a powerful tool as an adjunct. But for those who don't go into the medical approach, but are just taking that accompanying role, that facilitator, assistive role, it's actually part of their professional standard that's a model of working as a professional way to work. Well, and I really think that's important for lay people, but also as an important, powerful thing to use as a professional.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do in New Zealand, is really promote the professional level of kinesiology in general. So thank you very much, Matthew, for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you, and we'll see you in March.
Yep, I'll see you very soon.
Bye.